Welcome to Empower Her Radio, the podcast for healthcare moms who want to break free from limiting beliefs, build unshakable confidence, and step into the truest expression of themselves, both personally and professionally. I'm your host, Corey Wynn. I'm a wife, a mom, a doctor of physical therapy, and a peak performance strategist. Working with highly motivated women to transform their lives and inspire those around them is what truly lights my soul on fire. Each episode, whether it's a solo session filled with actionable strategies or an inspiring interview with a woman who has overcome significant obstacles, is designed to leave you feeling worthy and confident in the value you have to offer everyone around you. I hope you walk away empowered and ready to take that next step to lead your life on purpose. Now, let's dive into today's show. Hey guys, I wanted to pop in real quick with a special offer today. Everything that I do here at Empower Her Radio and in my private coaching practice, Elevate and Empower, is to empower and equip women, specifically moms, with everything that they could possibly need to live their dream life. So I want to give you my dream life blueprint today that can help you get started with that. Just head to corywynn.com/dreamlifeblueprint and you can find that in the show notes. All right, now back to today's show. All right. Hello, everyone. I am so excited about our guest today, Nicole Runyon. She is a powerhouse when it comes to childhood development and tech-related issues. She is an esteemed psychotherapist, parent coach, and keynote speaker, renowned for her expertise in child and adolescent mental health. Backed by an extensive 20-plus year career, Nicole's uniqueness lies in the fact that she has an uncanny ability to help adults get in the minds of today's children and better understand them. Motivated by an unwavering passion for supporting children's well-being and debunking the poor parenting advice that has flooded our society, Nicole has dedicated her life's work to empowering parents and educators to help children grow and mature into young adults with purpose, strength, and confidence. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We were just sort of chatting before we started the show today about all the things that sort of plague children and adolescents. And at the end of the show today, I'll make sure that you guys know how to follow Nicole because she has a wealth of information on her Instagram and is just so open to give advice and talk about what's going on with our kiddos today. What's the number one thing you hear from parents that they're struggling with or that their children are struggling with most often?
Anxiety and issues with technology.
Yeah.
Yes, those are definitely big things going on with today's kids. And I really like to teach parents about root causes and what might be behind that. Because what I found from doing psychotherapy with children is that it really isn't a mental health or a mental illness issue. Yeah, sure. We can look at the symptoms and apply a DSM diagnosis to it, but we aren't really recognizing where it's coming from. And essentially, it's coming from the environment that they're in. And so instead of pathologizing them, putting them in therapy, putting them on medication, I really want parents to feel empowered with the knowledge and then with the ability to help their children work through what I actually think are oftentimes normal developmental issues. Kids are going to struggle with growing. Growing is painful, growing is hard. And it's okay to be uncomfortable. But I think oftentimes today's parents struggle with allowing their children to be uncomfortable. So because of that, kids aren't developing this resilience, this this self-trust to where they think they can handle situations or uncertainty because their parents are often doing things for them. And then when the parents aren't there and the world or life has expectations of them that they might not be able to meet those expectations because they weren't taught, then that's when the anxiety kicks in.
Okay.
And where I think tech issues come in is that it's a modality that's so readily available to them to be able to avoid, to be able to check out and
Mhm.
not have to deal with their feelings of angst or pain or suffering, which is, again, just part of life sometimes,
Right.
depending on the issue.
Mhm.
So the parents that I'm talking to are parents of kids who don't have any known traumas.
Mhm.
So when I speak about this, I'm not talking about kids that have been abused or neglected or
Right.
come from, homes where somebody is drug or alcohol addicted. I mean, these are real traumas that
Right.
we're going to see some pathology from that. But
Right.
that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to intact families, and parents who are there and showing up every day and still sort of continue to wonder, well, why is my kid
Mhm.
anxious, or why is my kid struggling when I do all of these things for them, right?
I am chuckling because I feel like I had that exact same conversation at my house this morning because that you're speaking my language right there. And I think so much, I grew up in a generation of suck it up, you're fine. My parents were great. They were there. I did not have any of that trauma, but it was very not much a feelings based kind of situation. It was kind of ignored. And I think my husband and I have tried to break those generational kind of patterns, but have probably swung all the way the other way, focusing very heavily on how you're feeling and whatnot. And it's funny because sometimes my immediate reaction is, "Oh, come on, you're fine." But then it's like, "No, I don't want to say that." But hearing you talk about that, I'd love some ideas for our parents who are going to be listening to kind of how to handle those type of situations, to not ignore. But I mean, just the other day, I looked at my daughter and I said, "It's okay to be bored. It's
Mhm.
okay. You have to be able to be bored." And she just looked at me like, "Oh," and she's 9.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah. So at risk of sounding like a therapist, how did that
Hey,
feel?
I'm totally fine for you sounding like
Okay,
a
good.
therapist.
But I'm curious because this is part of how I help parents is just identifying your feelings with that, right? So
Mhm.
when you said that to her, what did that feel like for you? Did that remind you of your parents who said, "Oh, get over it, you're bored"?
It's funny that you say that because I think back and I don't have a whole lot of memories from my young childhood. I I was an only child and I played a lot by myself, so I think I was bored or had coping strategies for being bored. I played.
Uh,
So, and I know my parents weren't there to play with me all the time. So for me, it's almost more like, come on, you can do this. I did this. You're fine. Like, let's move forward. Um, it's not a uncomfortable feeling for me, but I like to sit in the quiet sometimes. So I don't know.
that's
That's
great.
not
So
a great
that
answer.
No, it's a great answer because it demonstrates just how that was comfortable for you, so you were able to do that, right? And it didn't feel like you were neglecting her or making her feel bad because you know that you can tolerate it, and so
Uh-huh.
she can too.
Yeah.
And not only do you know you can tolerate it, but you know that you've pushed yourself past a point to where you actually enjoy it and you
Mhm.
find benefit in it.
Right.
And so that's a good example of the positive side of once you work through something, or maybe it's not an issue for you from your own childhood, then
Mhm.
you were able to help your child with it.
Mhm.
And then on the flip side, what you described as the pendulum swing, I talk about that with generational differences and how we were parented on one end of the pendulum. And because we didn't like that and we were wounded by that, we swing too far in the other
Mhm.
direction. And so it really is all about the parent identifying their discomfort, the holes in their development, what they struggle with, so that they can help their child with their own developmental struggles.
Mhm.
So there might be a parent who is the opposite from you, who
Mhm.
has wounds around being bored because
Mhm.
maybe they were neglected in a way where there wasn't enough of a balance between being with parents or people and
Mhm.
then entertaining yourself. Maybe it was too far in one direction.
Right.
So oftentimes those parents will struggle with their children being bored and they will want to entertain them all the time, whether
Mhm.
that's with a bunch of organized activities or, my husband and I call them Disney days, where
Mhm.
you take them to the park and the carnival and you buy them, the kettle corn and the candy and all the things, and, having those days on a regular basis. A lot of
Mhm.
parents do that
Mhm.
because, again, they're overcompensating for their wounds from their own childhood.
Okay. Well, and it's funny too because I can see the other side of that of me being able to be bored as a child, and also this situation of feeling like you need to always be working. I feel like we've been in a society where, like, oh, if I'm sitting still, I'm not doing enough. So for me, it's more learning how to be still in a different way than, because I'm never bored. There's always something that you can be doing, and being able to step back and say, but I don't need to be doing that right now. So I wonder how she sees that as inability to be bored. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because what you're describing is the modeling. So you
Hmm.
might be saying it's okay to be bored, but you're not necessarily modeling it. And
Right.
so she may be struggling with that, especially at 9. 9 is a time of huge growth spurt around individuation,
Okay.
and they develop a consciousness around themselves as an individual outside of the family. So what that means is they start seeing themselves as themselves.
Hmm.
And so, what she's going to be doing, especially with you, because you're the same sex parent, she's going to be looking at you and sort of taking cues.
Hmm.
And so, if you're modeling that you're never bored, she's going to be
Hmm.
confused
Yeah, that makes
about
sense.
boredom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm.
Yeah.
We can all learn from these things.
Oh, yes, we can.
Well, and that's so when I first met you and found out that your focus was really coaching the parent, it was fascinating to me because, I mean, again, I don't want to disclose too much about my daughter. I mean, she might listen to this one day, but like we've had therapy, and like I said, she's been a very, very anxious kid her whole life. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about how tech coincides or exacerbates those anxieties, and kind of boundaries around that.
So, tech really high level, there's a lot of issues with it. But if
Right.
you're, but I want to address what you're saying specifically about just that anxious type and
Hmm.
how it affects that personality type. It puts you into a place in your nervous system where it's fight or flight because
Hmm.
it's very overstimulating.
Right.
And so, if you're prone to being high strung,
Hmm.
then you're likely oftentimes in fight or flight mode in your nervous system.
Okay.
And if that's the case, then that means you have a little bit of trouble with the other side of the nervous system, which is rest and digest, right? And
Yes.
that's what you sort of were describing earlier.
Yes.
Yes. And so that actually, there is a genetic component or an environmental component.
Hmm.
It remains to be seen which is which, but the idea is that kids do often feed off of their parents and what they're modeling in relation to the nervous system. And so, if you already have that sort of need to be in the fight or flight, and you don't know how to come down from that, then tech is going to keep you in that.
Okay.
And it feels good because it's comfortable, it's what you know, and it's uncomfortable to then, take that away and try to rest.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
That's
there is really,
fascinating.
in a lot of ways, like a physiological component to all of this, which is why I took a more bird's eye view of what I was seeing in the children, because we can't just look at it like it's their brain or it's the
Right.
psychology. It's
Right.
they're a whole being.
Right.
And we need to see it that this is physiological as well. And again, the tech is feeding right into that physiology.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and I saw a post that you did just in the last little bit. It was talking about how tech affects your brain development. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So what we're seeing with children of this generation is that their brains are different. So when they do brain scans, they're different than kids that are off of tech.
Hmm.
And the differences at this point that they're finding are in the gray matter, which is responsible for sensory processing and, again, nervous system, regulation.
Mhm.
And the other thing that is happening is because they're using, so you have to think of not just what they're doing on technology, but what they're not doing because they're on technology.
Right.
So, what they're not doing from an early age is moving.
Mhm.
Even babies, their movement is restricted from some of the devices that are available to parents, like the snoo, for example, which is a smart bassinet, and it straps them down, and any kind of waking up that the machine senses, it will rock them and soothe them back to sleep so the parent doesn't have to.
Oh.
And these devices are actually quite common with parents today because they're convenient, right?
Mhm.
And so just from early on, babies aren't developing, they're not able to work through their primitive reflex,
Mhm.
their survival reflexes like the grasp reflex and the moral
Uh-huh.
reflex and the rooting
Yeah.
reflex because
Uh-huh.
their bodies are literally restricted. And so
Oh,
what's
wow.
happening is then they're growing to not integrate those reflexes. Those reflexes are supposed to go away
Right.
as you grow. But
Right.
many children today are retaining those reflexes,
Oh,
and they're
wow.
having not just physical developmental issues, but brain developmental issues like learning disabilities.
Well, and for most of my physical therapy career, I worked with like adolescents and adults,
Mhm.
high level teenage athletes and above. But when I was in school, I had a pediatric rotation. And it's fascinating that you're saying that because that was one thing that we looked at as like a brain injury type of issue
Yes.
if reflexes weren't integrated by a certain time. So I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but is there a way to determine where there is a neurological problem versus this tech type of issue?
Yes. So in this, for me, I only have anecdotal evidence of this. There
Hmm.
isn't, as far as I know, like any solid research around it. But I do have a colleague who has said that she has continuously seen this in her pediatric patients with no root in anything medical.
Oh, wow.
And she
Okay.
is attributing it to technology because she does do those questions with the parents and how much tech are they using and all of that. So yeah, I kind of forgot that you are a physical therapist, and so that would be of interest to you to kind of look even deeper into
Yeah.
because yeah. So not only again, the way that I talk about it like it's a wheel of child
Hmm.
development. So we have movement to start that then scaffolds the brain to grow and develop the way it needs to,
Right.
that then scaffolds the emotional development, that
Hmm.
then leads to the child being able to individuate
Hmm.
and launch and leave home. And so from the very beginning, like as these kids get more and more exposed to tech younger and younger, that wheel is being prevented from moving.
Wow. Well, and you
Yeah.
talk a lot about, I mean, most of my career, I worked with Parkinson's and stroke patients and the multiple systems atrophy, kind of progressive neurological diseases. And we talk about neuroplasticity in that way for movement and regaining strength, regaining how to swallow, all those types of things. When it comes to taking tech away or limiting tech, are you guys able to kind of anecdotally see the neuroplasticity going the opposite direction and regaining some of those things?
In that way, the judgment is still out. I
Uh-huh.
actually have a colleague, a neuroscientist colleague. Her name is Dr. Delia McCabe, and she talks about how there are these windows of development, and technology is infiltrating those windows and preventing that development from happening.
Hmm.
But she's very cautious about what she says in terms of if that can come back.
Right.
And so that remains to be seen.
Hmm.
But I can tell you from a social emotional standpoint, when that tech is eliminated, kids can sort of resilient, swing back
Hmm.
to growing the way that they need to.
Hmm.
It's just the parents have to understand that you don't just take the tech away, you also give them what's missing for
Hmm.
them. which is generally a connection.
Mhm.
And so once you have that connection, then you know developmentally what they need, and you can sort of undo some of
Right.
that
Yeah.
hindering of the growth.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and you were talking about the importance of boredom, and when you start to take the tech away or piece it down, I guess, what are some things that you typically coach parents into reintroducing? For parents who are like, well, now what do I do?
Yeah. Yeah. So depending on the age, I actually don't recommend reintroducing. If they're older, then yeah, you likely have to reintroduce because of school. They might need a device
Hmm.
for their homework or whatever. But if they're under 14, I really don't recommend it
Hmm.
because there is no reason for it.
Right.
And again, we have to think about what are they not doing when they're on the tech, and there's
Right.
so much developmentally. Like
Hmm.
every 6 months they're growing and they're
Hmm.
changing, and there's so
Uh-huh.
much developmentally we want them to be able to experience
Hmm.
without that distraction that's really just halting their
Hmm.
growth. So, and the other thing too, I notice is that once you take it away, and then again, you help them with what's missing and why they
Hmm.
needed it in the first place or why they thought they needed it,
Right.
they don't really miss it.
Right.
I hear so many, even I hear teachers who have said they've taken the Chromebooks out of the classroom, and you might hear moans and groans a little bit, but after a while they just stop asking for it
Hmm.
because they know they're getting what they need. And
Hmm.
when they're getting what they need, they don't need the tech or want the tech.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and even my own daughter, she wants to get in the car and, Mommy, can I play a song? And
Mhm.
then she wants to sit and read the lyrics as the song is playing. I'm like, no, come on, give it back to me. So it's just so interesting how much I even feel like we could change right now today at 9. But it's also interesting to hear her come home and say, well, so and so has a phone. And it
Yeah.
doesn't matter how many times we've said from like kindergarten till now, okay, but you're not going to have one.
Yeah.
It's this still like, well, maybe they've changed their mind. Maybe I'll get one anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. The kids of today are becoming master negotiators.
Yes. I looked at my husband the other day. I said, she's going to be a lawyer one day.
Yes. Yeah, but
So,
kids are I'm sorry if you wanted to
no,
move on,
no,
but just
no, no, go
as
ahead.
one point about that, kids are always going to, tell their parents or feel like everybody else gets to do this, right?
Oh,
Like I had
yeah.
a moment this summer with my 10-year-old where our expectations of her like chores were more because she's
Hmm.
getting older,
Hmm.
and she has not liked that very much. And so a lot of the conversation has been around nobody I know has chores. And, I always said, oh, well, that's impossible. I'm sure that's not true. And she had a girlfriend come over, and I forgot what they were doing, but I'd asked them to clean something up. Oh, they were baking, and I asked them to clean it up. And so I said to her friend, I said, do you have chores at home? And she said, yeah, I have to unload the dishwasher and, the laundry. She like listed some things. And I looked at my daughter and I said, interesting.
It's interesting how when like I said, I have two older bonus kiddos, but for the all intents and purposes, my daughter's an only child because she's the only one at home right now. It's very funny to see how their world is very much like, well, why am I the only one who has to do this?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
they're the only one in their home.
In their home. Yes.
So you talk about um like the top 5 mistakes parents make with, I think it was with tech. Would you mind sharing those here?
Mhm. Yeah, so parents often introduce tech too early,
Hmm.
and I think that's because of what we were talking about. There's this pressure
Right.
because everybody else is doing it. And you don't want your kid to feel left out. But again, when you introduce it too early, it hinders their development,
Hmm.
and so you really want to be concerned about their age and their readiness and their maturity level.
Hmm.
Another thing parents do is they don't model very good usage of technology.
Hmm.
So we have a lot of kids who are being told tech is bad, you can't have it, but then they're watching their parents overuse it,
Oh,
frankly.
yeah.
you know, and look, you know, I'm an entrepreneur. I work from home. My husband works from home. He's in sales. And so we're often on a computer or a
Right.
phone. And so I understand the struggle of
Mm-hmm.
needing to work, but wanting to model for your child like healthy habits.
Right.
So there are just, you know, some basic things parents can do. You can check your phone, you know, in a different room
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that you're engaged when you're in front of your child. You can, I often recommend doing chores together, making
Okay.
dinner together, pulling weeds, you know, doing the dishes, because those are things parents have to do anyway.
Right.
And so the kids can sort of be connected to you while you're doing that. So you feel like you're giving them that connection and you're not pulled in all these different directions.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're doing those things, obviously you're not on a device.
Right.
So it's a good way to be connected.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another thing parents do is, oh man, I might need a little reminder of what else I said in that post. I'm sorry.
No, that's totally fine. I can find it in a minute, but the other thing that you were talking about is allowing children to be uncomfortable and childhood independence. How are you seeing children escaping that, I guess, with tech on one hand, or just in general, and going back and you can tell me whether this kind of fits in with it or not, but I remember I was a nanny when I was in college and graduate school, and the lady who I was working for, she looked at me one day and she said, "We have done the biggest disservice to our children." And I looked at her and I thought, "You guys are home. You have a beautiful family. You're here. Like, what are you talking about?" She said, "Corey, I have literally done everything for my children their whole lives. They've forgotten their lunches. I've brought it to them." She said, "And now they're adults and they have no idea what to do." And I thought, "Oh my gosh, I can see that now." So what do you think about that for one, and then just allowing children to be uncomfortable and how that helps them be independent?
Yeah. So I think that's related to generational differences.
Okay.
So if you have young adults or teenagers,
Mm-hmm.
you're generally a Gen X parent.
Yes.
And Gen X was 1965 until 1979.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the generation of, we're called the forgotten about generation or the latchkey generation,
Mm-hmm.
where this was the second wave of feminism
Mm-hmm.
and moms went to work. And, you know, by no means am I criticizing that. I'm a working mom. You're a working mom. Nothing
Right.
wrong with
Right.
that.
Oh yeah.
What went wrong was that there was no conversation among the family of how that was going to work,
Mm-hmm.
right? So moms took on that second shift.
Yep.
And because moms took on that second shift, the kids got shuffled off to the side and they were often neglected. And so, what you're describing as the parenting of that generation was, you know, don't cry, get over it. You know, my mom used to say, "There's no reason to cry unless you have cancer or somebody died." Right? So this was the parenting, and of course, we were very wounded by that, right?
Uh-huh.
Because we needed some emotional component to it. Now, we had a lot of independence, which was great, but because we didn't get the emotional connection from our parents, that independence felt like a threat
Mm-hmm.
and it felt unsafe. So then what we did was we took that pendulum and we swung it way too far in the direction of our Gen Z children.
Mm-hmm.
And we parented them with this fear that if we made them responsible or take ownership or independent of something, we were neglecting them
Mm-hmm.
because that's how it feels to us.
Well, and it's so interesting too, because I'm right there in the middle. I was like an early 80s kid,
Hmm.
and I watched my mom go to work and do everything at home and do everything for all of my activities. And not that my dad wasn't willing, but he worked this like rotating shift. So he just wasn't home a lot. He worked very hard and provided for us. My mom did too. But it wasn't until my daughter was, I don't know, a couple years old that I looked at my husband and I said, "I cannot do all of this stuff."
Yes.
And it was very frightening almost on the one hand because I remember watching my mom doing it all. But if I really pay attention and look back, she lost herself in the midst of that.
Yes.
She had no self-care. She had no time for herself. She was on all the time. And now I feel like there's the generation of us that's like, that's not acceptable themselves, and model to our children that that has to happen. So it's very interesting to work through generational patterns and try and divert and not always know how to do that. So
That's right.
again, I'm
Yeah.
I'm really thankful that there's people like you out there and that our audience can connect with you, because I feel like our generation knows that there's something wrong there, or that something that they want to change, and they have no resources and no idea where to start.
That's right, because there was no modeling of the parents being partners and working together on that, because
Mhm.
it fell right all on mom. And so us daughters of those moms are trying to take it all on
Mhm.
and realize we can't. So we're trying to bring our partners in, but again, like to your point, we don't know how.
Mhm.
And so I talk about dads as well, that they are so well intentioned and they want to be there for their families, but they don't know what their role is,
Mhm.
because oftentimes their female partners are taking it all on because their mothers took it all on.
Uh-huh.
And then it's like, I've heard so many women in my practice come in and say, well, he just won't help or he won't do this. And my first question is that maybe because you're not letting him? And 90% of the time it's yes, you're right, I'm not letting him.
My husband grew up with a single mom for much of his younger years, so he will go and do all the things. And I will never forget, shortly after we had Eliza Jane, um, I said something to him and he kind of threw up his hands and he said, "Okay, I haven't done anything right in the last 2 weeks. What would you like for me to do?" And I was like, "Ooh."
Oh.
But it was eye-opening for me because I was trying to do everything and direct how it needed to be done and when it needed to be done and where it needed to be done. And he's perfectly capable of doing things.
That's right. They are. Yeah.
So,
My husband said from the very beginning, he said, I hate that archetype of the dumb dad that doesn't know how
uh-huh,
to do anything. And there was always commercials in the 80s and the 90s of the dumb dad, right?
uh-huh.
Or if dad was home with the kids, all chaos ensued and mom would come home and be upset with everyone. And he said that from day one. He said, I hate that and do not ever treat me that way.
Yep. My husband told me early on, he said, "You can tell me what to do or how to do it, but not both, because if you can tell me both, you can do it yourself."
Oh,
And
I
at
like
first I
that.
thought, "Whoa." And then I thought, "Oh, but he's right. I don't
Mhm.
need to guide and direct
It's
everything
true.
that he needs to do." But it is really funny.
It is, and so that's why I again, I shifted my focus to the parents because, like, let's look at what happens to a kid in that situation, right?
Right.
Like you said, you described your friend who has adult kids who then can't do anything for themselves.
Hmm.
That's what happens
Right.
because mom is overcompensating because she doesn't want them to feel that her presence, her lack of presence is abandoning or neglecting.
Hmm.
Yes.
Wow.
When really, actually, you show your love for your child by giving them independence,
Hmm.
and they thrive in that.
Yeah. When you have, I mean, I can just think even here at our house, we still, as much as we've tried to not do so many things, still tend to. And I think some of it's out of impatience. We're
Mhm.
quick people. Um, what advice would you give those parents who are looking for ways to give their children more independence and just don't know how?
Yeah. I think a lot of awareness. So I like what you said about how you do it, but like then you recognize you do it,
Hmm.
right? So you're gonna do it. You're gonna default to what you know or what's comfortable for you. But if
Hmm.
you're aware of it, you can stop and you can say to them, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. This is something that you can do by yourself. And if you need our help, we're here for you. But by all means, go for it.
Hmm.
And then on the other side of that, you're going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so it's a matter of managing that for yourself because uh, you can't relieve your discomfort through them or
Mhm.
by not, giving them that independence that they need.
Mhm.
And then, just understanding child development because they need different things at different times.
Right.
But very high level, they have a major individuation growth spurt at 2, at 9, and at 16.
Okay.
And so just kind of pay attention to what they're doing or what they're asking for. You've got the 2-year-old saying, no, I want to do it by myself, right? Let them,
Yeah.
safely, of course.
Right.
And you want to teach them. But these are all times when they need you to take a step back and
Mhm.
let go. And I always, I tell people this is where I struggle with my parenting. When I have to separate, it's really hard.
Mhm.
So I just oftentimes know that about myself and I might, I make mistakes and I kind of step in and then I step back and I say, "Oh,
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that," kind of
Right.
thing. But yeah, it's really just all about self-awareness and managing your own feelings.
Well, and I think too, our generation is also really working on repairing and, again, I grew up in a great household and the expectation was that I listened and I followed directions and I didn't talk back and I wasn't rude. And I think back now and also having grown up in the South, you respected your elders. You know, children were quiet and expected to, be seen and not heard kind of a situation. And it's very interesting to see the dynamic of grandparents and us and our children and how that's all changing. And it's very uncomfortable. So, what advice would you have to people who are working on boundaries, both with their children and level of independence, but also, with grandparents and different parenting styles?
Yeah. I think the answer really lies in somewhere in the middle of we've talked about the pendulum swing. We
Right,
want to be in the middle, right? We want to acknowledge and validate our children's feelings. We want to
right,
be there for them. We want to be able to allow them to talk to us about their feelings without dismissing them. That's
right,
really important.
right.
Where parents, I think, have a really hard time is again that triggers parents in their own wounds. And
Mhm.
so then they want to rescue or fix.
Uh-huh.
And that's where the parenting that we had in our generation or the boomers had kind of comes in.
Mhm.
That those firm boundaries and the expectation of respect and the discipline. That's
Mhm.
very important because that scaffolds between that and the like the love and the support that
Mhm.
scaffolds the child for growth.
Okay.
That's the
Okay.
magic, formula.
Mhm.
And there is a style of parenting called authoritative parenting, and that's the worst word in the world because it sounds like authoritarian.
Uh-huh.
But
Uh-huh.
there is authoritarian parenting, and that's that what you're describing,
Uh-huh.
discipline, all of that. But the authoritative parenting is a balance between the two because you
Okay.
you have to have both.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember reading just as my kiddo was little, like you can be mad, but I'm gonna hold your hands because you can't hit.
Yes.
In that much more early developmental stage, or I know you love to run, so I'm gonna hold your hand so that we're
Mhm.
safe. And I find myself not explaining as much maybe as I should, or maybe not should, but would help my daughter understand what's happening because I tend to still just do whatever it is without explaining. Um, I did think about one more thing with tech. And when you think about like screen time for movies or cartoons that kiddos like to watch, is there a recommendation to still kind of get rid of that? Or is there a time frame that you recommend for family time or like having the screen be in the room with everyone? Anything like that?
For sure, yeah. So, generally speaking, I like family movie nights.
Mm-hmm.
So, if your kid is anywhere in those years from 5 to I don't know, really any age, because you
Hmm.
can do it with teenagers too. But
Right.
um, that's what if you're going to have any kind of screen time, it should be in a central location,
Hmm.
uh, preferably on a TV, not an iPad,
Right.
with parents connecting over something.
Hmm.
Because that iPad, it keeps you in your own world, and it
Hmm.
sort of makes you have a myopic view of
Right.
something, and you shut out everything else, and it trains your brain. It wires your brain for addiction,
Okay.
because you press a button, you get an immediate response.
Hmm.
So it feeds into that reward feedback loop. And so that's why I like more kind of centrally located family time
Hmm.
around tech. And even if that's, video games, they are made to be addictive. The algorithm makes them addictive. But if you're a video game family, or as parents, you enjoy video games, you can do that together with your
Right.
kids, with limits and amounts of time, and making sure that if they are addicted, you want to maybe take a break from it.
Right.
But yeah, I do definitely think that we live in 2024, and they're going to be exposed, and that's
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
But we want to make sure we're aware and we do it the right way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, I want to be super respectful of your time. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to make sure our audience hears about, knows about? And then I also want to make sure that everybody knows how to get in touch with you.
Yes, well, thank you. So I am coaching individual parents, and I also speak. So if your school is in need of some information around technology or child development, I have a keynote that incorporates how technology affects child development.
Okay.
And people can go to my website, NicoleRunyon.com. I'm on Instagram at iGeneration Mental Health, and I'm on LinkedIn as Nicole Runyon.
Awesome. Well, and I'll make sure all of that is in our show notes as well. But be sure to follow Nicole. I mean, we just recently were connected, and I'm so glad that we were, because I have already gained such a wealth of knowledge by everything that she posts and talks about. And as a parent of a kiddo with anxiety, it also just gives me so much information on how much I can control at home, how much I can work on, that maybe medication doesn't need to be involved, maybe therapy doesn't need to be involved, or maybe it does, but with all these other things too. So I so appreciate your time today, and be sure to follow Nicole on all the social media sites.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Absolutely. Thank you for tuning in to today's show. If this episode resonated with you, I would truly appreciate a 5-star review. Your feedback is so important to me. Additionally, if today's topics have sparked a desire for more in your life and you're unsure about the next step, I have a special offer for you. I'm offering a free call to explore how my high level coaching and strategizing can help you gain clarity on your goals, prioritize what is most important to you, and refocus on yourself in the process. Simply head over to correywin.com/free call. That's www.coreyWinn.com/free call. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.